Ladies and gentlemen, I shall begin by reading a letter. It was written by a young man to his mother. As you listen to it, I'd like you to observe and to evaluate the thinking processes that this letter reflects. Quote, "Dear Mother, today I am feeling better than yesterday. I really don't feel much like writing, but I love to write to you. After all, I can tackle it twice. Yesterday, Sunday, I would have been so happy if you and Louise and I could have gone to the park. One has such a lovely view from Stephen's Castle. Actually, it's very lovely in Bergolsli. Louise wrote Bergolsli on her last 2 letters. I mean to say on the envelopes. No, the couverts which I received. However, I have written Bergolsli in the spot where I put the date. There are also people in Bergolsli who call it Holzleberg. Others talk of a factory. I'm writing on paper. The pen which I'm using is from a factory called Perry & Company. This factory is in England. I assume this. Behind the name of Perry Company, the City of London is inscribed, but not the city. The City of London is in England. I know this from my school days. Then I always liked geography. My last teacher in that subject was Professor August A. He was a man with black eyes. I also liked black eyes. There are also blue and gray eyes and other sorts too. I've heard it said that snakes have green eyes. All people have eyes. There are some, too, who are blind. These blind people are led about by a boy. It must be very terrible not to be able to see. There are people who can't see, and in addition can't hear. I know some who hear too much. One can hear too much. There are many sick people in Bergolsli. One of them I like a great deal. He taught me that in Bergolsli there are many kinds. Then there are some who are not here at all. They are all peculiar people." Unquote. Now you will all immediately grasp that this letter is not the product of a rational thinking process. But identify why and how you know this. What did you observe about the letter that led you to this conclusion? What you observed was this: that the various thoughts that compose the letter are not linked or logically connected by any central theme. The writer wanders mentally. His ideas ramble without any intelligible progression. Each sentence is connected to the next by some chance association, not by a logical connection. The total is a grab bag of separate, unrelated thoughts. And although each separate sentence is formally grammatical and does convey a meaning, the sentences lead nowhere, and the total has no meaning. What the letter crucially lacks is the unifying, integrating factor of purpose. The writer of this letter is a catatonic schizophrenic. I was quoting from Eugene Bleuler's famous monograph on schizophrenia, Dementia Praecox. The letter was presented as an example of schizophrenic thinking. A major symptom of schizophrenia is the deterioration of the thinking process, a deterioration that's made manifest in the schizophrenic's inability to hold to a single purpose and to unify and integrate his thoughts around that purpose in a logical progression. Thinking, in the literal and rational meaning of the word, is a purposeful mental activity having knowledge of reality as its goal. Whether it be a child's first attempt to grasp the difference between a dog and a cat, or an abstract philosopher's attempt to define the fundamental nature of reality, it's the presence of a purpose that crucially distinguishes a rational process of thought from the lunatic ramblings of a schizophrenic. Wherever there is thought, there is purpose, a purpose setting and directing every step of the thinking activity. But just as a focus must be volitionally set and maintained, so a purpose must be volitionally set and maintained. In order to think, A mind must choose and then hold to its mental goal, that is, the problem to be solved or the concept to be grasped. This will not happen automatically. It requires an active mental decision. It requires self-consciousness, an awareness of what one's mind is doing, and direction and control of what one's mind is doing. Now, certainly most people's minds don't function quite like the schizophrenic who wrote the letter I quoted. But neither are most people purposeful and self-conscious about the activities of their minds. And as a result, the mental processes of people who would consider themselves rational and intelligent are too often frighteningly similar to those of the schizophrenic writer. The difference, as I'll demonstrate, is one of degree. Everyone recognizes that a child isn't born knowing how to talk, to walk, to read, to write, that he must learn how to do these things. But everyone assumes that somehow a child and an adult does automatically know how to think. Everyone assumes that thinking is in effect an instinct, something that one just knows how to do, and that no process of study or learning is required. Well, if you believe this, check your premises. If you were to stop a dozen people at random, give them a problem to think about, and later ask them to report on what their minds had proceeded to do in order to solve the problem, you would discover that they had engaged in quite different kinds of mental activity, but all of them called their mental activity thinking. You would discover that when people use the word thinking, they very often use it to name quite different kinds of mental activities, some of which are effective in gaining knowledge, some of which are grossly ineffective. People customarily take their own mental processes as self-evidently valid, as not to be questioned. They don't seek to correct or improve faulty methods of thinking because it doesn't even occur to them to consider their methods of thinking. As a result, inefficient methods, once initiated, harden into habits, which are then practiced automatically. And one's thinking processes continue to deteriorate, and one is less and less able to solve problems, less and less able to deal with reality, and to direct one's life intelligently. And those who have never properly learned to think are, of course, always the quickest to conclude that the mind is impotent, that thinking is not the means to acquire knowledge. They do not question the nature of their own mental processes. They question instead the efficacy of reason. Inefficient methods of thinking are the greatest of all destroyers of intelligence. Whatever a man's potential intellectual capacity, his actual ability to deal with problems can be no better than his method of thinking, no better than his method of using that capacity. The greatest brain on earth could not solve the simplest of problems if he approached it by the method of the schizophrenic letter writer. You have all heard the saying, "Whom the gods would destroy, they first make mad." If you look at the manner in which most men run their lives, you will conclude that it's more accurate to say, "Whom the gods would destroy, they first make stupid." But this stupidity is not the result of a deficient brain. It's a self-made stupidity, a stupidity that is the inexorable result of inefficient thinking processes. A high intellectual capacity is only a potential, which its possessor must learn how to use.